마이크. 네. 마크 D 휘테거 박사님이신데요. 휘테거 박사님께서는 지속 가능성 목표로 일반적인 주속의 사회성과 환경, 기술 간의 상호작용을 연구하고 계시고요. 2019년 초 스마트시티에서 지속 가능 발전 목표 달성을 위한 새로운 모바일 가상 커뮤니티 플랫폼인 커모디티 에콜로지라는 지속 가능성 모델에 대한 유엔과 아시아 개발은행에서 발표가 되어지기도 했습니다. 커모디티 이콜로지는 지역 협력을 촉진하기 위한 브레이밍 스토밍 도구이자 폐기물 및 제품 내에서 지속 가능한 옵션과 재료 흐름을 지속 가능성을 측정하는 방법인데요. UN 아카데미 임팩트라는 UNAI에서 SDG에 대한 적용 구형 모델 목록에서 상품 생태학 1위로 선정되기도 할 정도로 매우 실용성이 높은 모델임을 알 수가 있었습니다. 오늘 휘태거 박사님께서 1990년대부터 현재까지의 스마트 도시에서 스마트 지역으로의 확장된 모바일 ICT 액세스에 대해서 말씀해 주실 예정이고요. 더불어서 이에 대한 글로벌 상황은 어떤지 비교 분석한 사안에 대해서도 전해 주실 예정입니다. 한번 들어봐 주시기 바랍니다. 네, 휘태거 박사님 모시겠습니다.
Thank you very much. Fellow conference participants and distinguished guests, thank you for allowing me this honor of addressing you in this keynote presentation. Also, thank you to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom in collaboration with Gwangmyeong City and the Hybrid Future Culture Institute of Sungkyunkwan. My title, Smart Cities to Smart Regions with Widening Mobile ICT Access. Global Comparisons of Trends and Approaches 1990 to the Present. There are 4 sections of this presentation. First, I'll review the ideas of smart growth and smart cities. Second, I suggest ICT applications presumed to be innately smart and sustainable are not actually smart until actual human group intelligence is involved in it, and are not actually sustainable until a more holistic ecological design intelligence is clear and specified in all material choices and material handling. Third, I discuss trends for the year 2050. I will argue that current smart cities by themselves are unable to handle up to the 3 billion people potentially living in the shadow city, the unofficial slum communities around the urban areas of the world that are growing now. However, smart cities can be seeds for starting the project of wider smart regions now that can address the shadow city in the world that is developing. This can be done via smart cities starting online social media platforms for feedback to all 7 major urban infrastructures and services, accessed by mobile ICT networks that rich and poor alike share worldwide, that can grow in feedback as urban sites grow easily. Fourth, I have some United Nations recognized ideas of my own for social media platforms that can turn the smart city into the smart region. This is called commodity ecology. Commodity ecology can be a seed for a smart regional planning by beginning a more holistic ecological and regional discussion of over 130 different material categories and uses and their waste streams together. Commodity ecology can address material handling problems of shadow cities as they begin to arise as well. There are 2 themes, I think, that come together in why smart cities are, I think, moving towards smart regions. And the first one is we're living in a context where ICT has ceased to be scarce and expensive. And a lot of the ideas of the forms of smart cities were developed when that was so. Due to citizen consumer mobile ICT networks now, in 2019, it's estimated there's over 5.1 billion mobile phones globally. There's about 7.7 billion people right now. Plus, unlike a lot of technologies, there is not much digital divide. Their digital divide exists in many other technologies, but for mobile networks per se, there's almost a digital parity. And equal urban and rural areas of the world equally have access to this technology, which makes it an interesting developmental platform. Plus, I will show you no zones in the world now remain under 50% mobile phone connectivity, even in the center of Africa. All this makes wider, deliberative smart regions possible in all regions and globally as well. Does your smart city integrate online platforms accessible by your citizens' mobile phones? 7 platforms I argue would be ideal, described later. And I have in mind another one called commodity ecology for all smart regions of the world, described later. So first, some global statistics dealing with mobile networks. In this year of January 2019, as I said, 7.7 billion people. Notice the unique mobile users, 5.1 billion smartphones. This is not an internet world. We live in a mobile world. The hegemony of mobiles is at least 10% higher than internet users per se. And we're almost reaching 50% people comfortable with social media, which is astounding. In 2015, the world still had darker areas, right? This is a map from Facebook pings of people who use that large platform. And if you notice, there's some places very dense, like where we are in South Korea, and other places very spotty, like center of Africa. But surprisingly, you might look at rural areas like Poland, Thailand, as well as India, have a huge network capacity, and despite not being very urbanized zones per se. Let's look at the modern world, though. This is also from January 2019. The lowest one you'll find is Middle Africa, of 53%. This is mobile connectivity by region, the number of mobile connections compared to total population. This is not the total number of users, but the number of unique mobile connections. There's a lot of SIM cards exchanging in many less developed countries, so that's why you see some that are over 100%. But just let's look at places you think that are not developing, per se. Africa this year has about 1.3 billion people as a whole, but nonetheless, look at the next column, mobile subscriptions, 80% of the population. You may not have known that. What about India? About the same as all of Africa, 1.36. Mobile subscriptions even higher, 87% of the population. This is not smartphones, this is mobile phones per se. But as of this year, globally, mobile phones actually are smartphones are actually 55% of the global mobile market already. So we're living in a very distributed world of technologies, and that's a great platform to roll out any kind of smart city to smart regional dynamic. As I said here, the point is if you want to roll out the SDGs, which are the Sustainable Development Goals, or smart regions, nothing makes more sense for human equal access at this point than a mobile platform. Why smart cities and smart regions? The second point, wider systemic concerns about environmental problems beyond just making urban sites sustainable, beyond just taking out the trash in the urban area. We need to worry about taking out the trash in all the rural areas as well because of systemic problems, like across wider landscapes. And I'll just show you some flash pictures very quickly of issues that I think are prominent and why we need to worry about wider systemic concerns about material handling beyond just a smart city zone. Ecological externalities are human externalities. You know, do you breathe? Do you eat? Do you have kids? Yes. So just a few areas of ecological concern in our present globalization that requires wider smart regional development, I think, instead of only smart cities per se. Global groundwater and soil depletion, global fisheries exploitation, global dead zones, which are areas of no oxygen in the oceans. There's about 400 this year. Biodiversity loss on the land, global plastic pollution in the oceans. And let's just first look at global groundwater depletion. A huge part of the United States, place where a lot of agriculture is shipped around the world, is in danger. That's the Ogallala Aquifer, which is slowly being pulled apart by a lot of industrial agriculture. Areas of Pakistan are the worst, but a lot of people in India will starve, most likely, as water tables drop tremendously. It's even worse when you think about soil degradation. We need to make a society that's a soil-creating society and not a soil-destroying society. Fish catches have really declined since 1988. You might not have known that. Global plastic pollution, you've probably seen this famous picture of a bird full of plastic because it looks like floating pieces of squid or octopus, and they just can't digest that, obviously, and it digests them. And of course, we are at the top of the food chain, and we begin to eat plastic as well. This is where the plastic is located in the Pacific, but there are 5 gyres or circular zones of the entire Earth where plastic pollution is growing. And we've only been using plastic for about 70 years, right? 1 mile of zooplankton trawl here in the gyre of the Pacific yields something like this. And at the bottom it says, in the most polluted place in the ocean, the mass of plastic is more than 6 times the mass of plankton, and plankton is the basis of the global food chain in the oceans. So whenever things come up at night to eat plankton, they're probably eating 6 times more plastic than they are plankton. And we're making things which really don't fit into any kind of ecological cycle, given those years. Countries polluting the oceans are not always the Western countries per se. It's mostly developing countries per se that don't have a proper structure regionally to take care of their trash. Indonesia this year has announced a policy to try to remove 70% by 2025 of their plastic pollution, so good luck to them. But just some other emotional grabbing pictures here. Also, news stories, pollution killing more people than war and violence, says the report. 60% of the world's wildlife has been wiped out since 1970, a report by the World Wildlife Fund. World on track to lose 2/3 of wild animals by 2020, next year. 75% of insects have disappeared over the past decade, says a new extensive study. When the insects die, so do the larger animals. We are destroying our planet's ability to correct for our abuse. The last point, dead zones, which are hypoxic zones or lack of oxygen, basically caused by several different factors. One of them is air pollution, but documented zones have really expanded. Into the 1990s, people thought it was severe at 68, but now it's around 400. Also, in the hypoxic zones is associated with this because toxic air really is connected to hypoxic zone, but we also breathe it as well, particularly young children. Dead zones historically, historic modern world, mostly around industrialized 3 zones of the United States, Europe, and where we are now. But this is a more modern map. Now it's estimated over 400 different ocean dead zones in the world. These are caused by excess nutrients and also air pollution. Here's another way of mapping those dead zones around the world. The situation in the United States, close to 50% of the world's dead zones are off the very urbanized USA, half of all estuaries. In Europe, 14 persistent dead zones that never go away, almost 40 other occurring in the Baltic Sea. In East Asia, persistent dead zones in the East Sea between Korea and Japan. Why riverborne nitrogen, bad agricultural practices, fuel burning plants and air pollution, and phosphorus, industrial agriculture. Just some pictures, nothing bad about China per se. This is a global problem of algae getting in the water. When algae gets in the water, it dies, and when it dies, that's what pulls the oxygen out of the water. This was from 2008. Those are people, by the way. These are very large amounts of toxic red algae in the river at Gwangmyeong. And there's a symbolic picture, I thought, of algae and fossil fuels at the same time. But anyway, why, back to this point, to rephrase after the pictures, wider systematic concerns about environmental problems just beyond handling city management issues. Moving on. Societies of saturated mobile ICT networks, defined roughly as over 90% of the population, are innately creating their own smart regions to deliberate about things beyond the city, within which a wider, more sustainable regional politics is developing around improving all urban infrastructures, material choices, waste handling to benefit everyone. Moving on, the first of the 4 points, smart city review. A different deliberative and regionalized future is being created in the early 21st century in our society of equitable mass communication. Changes of media regimes have been neglected in understanding changing political dynamics in world history. Capacities for civil deliberation on political issues depend upon the capacities of the media regimes in which we live. Today's change of media regime for living in societies characterized by saturated mobile ICT networks is making deeply deliberative smart regions possible for the first time. This has never happened before. We have to really go back to speech to really have a media where we all, 90% or more share. So, this means using ICT in more than just one-way matter of information smart cities, or of one-way information gathering of various IoT structures to a centralized node of administration. In the major 7 urban infrastructural areas, which I think are transport, energy, water, sewage, economy, governance, and communications. It means instead a 2-way information flow between civil society and the governmental and administrative actors that can be harnessed toward making cities intelligent instead of only smart. As I said earlier, I suggest ICT applications presumed to be innately smart or sustainable are not, unless they're actually involved with human intelligence and group deliberation per se. And we're not actually sustainable at all until we really have a more holistic ecological design intelligence is clear and specified in all material choices. Moving on, this has been poetically summarized, this media change has been poetically summarized by an Argentinian software designer, female named Pia Mancini, another designer of online platforms for mass deliberation. She invented an interesting platform for democratic virtual deliberation called Democracy OS, OS operating system. But her quote is, "We are 21st century citizens doing our very best to interact with 19th century design institutions that are based on an information technology of the 15th century." Similarly, it is argued that an inherited debate from the 1990s about the difficult to define term smart cities, which generally means how to create more sustainable, deliberative cities with ICT, equally will be outmoded by a wider debate about smart regions, which is how to organize a sustainable project far wider, more participative, and more ecologically holistic than just an urban node. Into my second section of 4, the idea of nodes of smart cities, I would argue, really depended upon the idea when ICT was scarce, when it made sense for government and corporate ownership to really dominate the data sets. But I wonder if this has ceased to be true now. Others have conceptualized smart city concept as generally the idea of improving the smartness of 6 infrastructures of urban context. And I talked about those already, right? But I would add 1/7 infrastructure, which surprisingly is not there, that all of you are probably using every day, which is communications, right? So, why not have structures which monitor the health of the communication networks within a city? Because that's a crucial way that all of these are now smart. Anyway, in other words, you might judge intelligence of a city or region on a scale of 1 to 7, right? On these points here, you might rank a city, do they have this two-way design intelligence in this feedback relationship between citizens and users of all of their infrastructures or not? So you might develop a ranking this way of whether they have two-way feedback of information between the providers who use it and people who use the infrastructures. Moving on, now we face a different issue based on externalities created by urban growth itself. So we fixed urban growth 150 years ago, and that's what's allowed us to live in mega cities today. But now we're swimming in our own waste, which is not in the city per se, but it's outside of the city. We made only urban living infrastructurally durable by exporting unsolved urban externalities to more rural areas of our countries or to the world at large. Think of e-waste that's being bandied around all over the world right now. We are now breathing in our urban-based consumptive waste worldwide in near perpetual particle pollutions from past energy choices. We are now swimming, drinking, and eating plastic pollution mistakes introduced 70 years ago when non-biodegradable plastics were added to quotidian life that now flow in small amounts in almost all children's blood in industrialized countries. Our next project is to make all material handling more sustainable, to keep cities, rural areas, and now even threatened biodiversity in general intact, instead of previously worrying about the city site per se only. The problem has been the city site has been sustainable, right? And the limited sense of sustainability and durability allowed this to have an immense growth when we're now living within that success. So the economic shakeout of agriculture also, beginning in the 1800s and then really expanding after World War II, from animal husbandry to factory farms, from local agriculture to industrial agriculture, all of that really are feeding, traceable back to being developed to service the larger urban-based nodes that we live in. So the urban and rural regional context together of all material choices and waste choices, materials of the past are wider problems to solve now. The development of the concept smart cities, when did it come about? The 1990s, but there was also a lot of other different topics. According to the Fulbright Scholar of Global Smart Cities, Sabina Baraniszewicz-Kodaszinska, I know her so I can pronounce her name properly. Before or current with the idea of smart city were other future-oriented conceptions of development, whether the green city, eco-city, sustainable city, innovative city, intelligent city, compact city, digital city. The above terms are more about planning and not really deliberative civil governance. So additionally, she analyzed various definitions of smart city in the literature, classifying 4 ways that smart cities governance and design are discussed in various plans. A dichotomy is developed in these lectures we've heard so far, that it's ICT kind of versus human, that there's 2 tracks. I will kind of add 2 more and sort of challenge that dichotomy as well. One would be the technological or transformational city. The other one is a human-oriented city. The other one is more about socioeconomic development, where the city itself sees digital technologies as a source of growth. And the critical perspective, as if it's just a buzzword and a not necessary structure. 2.1 of 4, the for-profit technological definitions of smart cities. We all know this one. First, the technological view of smart cities focuses on ICT as the leading sector of this change towards smart cities. This is all about networks of sensors, smart devices, real-time data, and ICT integration in every aspect of human life. And increasingly the use of these technologies as stopgaps to overcome challenges of rapid aggregation and urbanization to maintain the same previous infrastructural services. Technological view of smart cities focus on state-of-the-art technologies, smart grids, sensors, networks, ICT, big data. We all know this. Technology purchases as a set agenda. It's assumed you need to have this to have a smart city, period. Are argued to solve all city problems instead of allowing civil deliberation in the first place upon what are the problems or what might be other solutions. A cooperation of authorities with business entities and technical experts with specialty IT skills is really crucial for this kind of smart city to manage itself. Baranowicz-Koroshinska calls this technocratic model of a smart city governance the market model, but I prefer as the for-profit model because it's unclear if actual markets are being employed here. Just profits are being employed mostly by city investments and ever-advancing, mostly increasingly obsolescent ICT toward wide-scale cooperation of city authorities and business entities in which technologies are equally the source of city management, and yet they're privately owned public commons databases. They've been enclosed by private companies that manage our public data for their own private profit as well. So there's really two motivations for a lot of the for-profit technological smart city. Instead of simply the smart city for itself, or the reason they do it is just to protect us as citizens. In other words, in this technocratic for-profit model, the city system is operated based on smart technologies more for generating profit from the big data for various private companies foremost, and only secondarily being useful for smart city concerns. Within the technological model, there are two kinds of smart cities. I wish I had more time to talk about cases, but I'm just talking about abstraction at this point. The first are cities built from scratch as commercial projects. Examples are Masdar City in Abu Dhabi in the UAE, as well as, of course, very close to us, Songdo, Incheon in South Korea. The second are transformed cities, which are equally for-profit commercial projects. On those transformed cities, we have the refurbishing of older cities into smart cities by public-private partnerships, but really not really with a market environment, typically with huge public tender contracts into data gathering in a smart city. The previous management method and functioning of the city is ended for creating a smart city that harvests data from its users as citizens and consumers. This is equally an ICT-oriented city, just like before, formed by public-private partnerships where companies are hired through the actual transforming by public contracts, paying them for the service or in the ongoing rented private uses of their data services in perpetuity. Also, such companies tend to get de facto public oversight of themselves and all urban citizens' data in the process. Examples of these are like Kansas City, Kansas, in the United States, perhaps the best known example of collaboration toward a transformed smart city. Also, another example is Toronto in Canada, which is international US companies like Google are relied upon to transform civic infrastructures in a totally different country into data gathering tools for urban management and, of course, for Google's own private profit. It is this dystopian surveillance that has caused some original large financial backers of the transformed Toronto to withdraw their support and be vocally against this model. One example of this, warning of a surveillance capitalism nightmare, the big tech investor, American venture capitalist Robert Gwangmyeong has abandoned his support for the transformation of Toronto under these conditions. Quote, he says, it's a dystopian vision that has no place in a democratic society. American venture capitalist Roger Gwangmyeong, an early investor in big tech companies, including Google and Facebook, who urged Toronto officials this week in June of 2019 to abandon a proposed smart city waterfront development, adding his voice to a growing chorus of people who have raised privacy and data collection concerns about the project. The proposed 12-acre Quayside neighborhood is a project of Sidewalk Toronto, which is a partnership between Sidewalk Labs, which is a part of Google, and the Smart City project of the Toronto waterfront is the most highly evolved version to date of what Harvard professor Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. Number two, the socioeconomic definitions. this is not per se for the management of cities. It's basically seen as a digital development of the city. Others define smart cities differently. There's the socioeconomic dimension. There's only concern with applying ICT as a sector for economic growth and intersectoral collaboration via the help of ICTs. In this definition of smart cities, a city may be called smart when investments in human and social capital and tradition and modern communication infrastructure fuel sustainable economic growth and a high quality of life with wise management of natural resources through participatory governance. In this sense, city authorities alone have ceased to rule the smart city because there are other stakeholders, and the wider companies and people themselves are these stakeholders. Human definitions of smart cities, which we've talked about a lot before. Third, according to Bereniszewicz-Kodaszinska, others define smart cities in a more humane dimension. In this humanistic model of smart cities, the human is the most important part of the smart city, and infrastructural implementation focuses directly on the desires of the city inhabitants and ongoingly deliberates with them on what these desires and problems are. Such a humanistic model of smart city respects the rules of sustainable development, yet a cooperation of the urban authority with business entities and technical experts with special IT skills is less essential to properly govern and manage a smart city if the crucial point is to respect humans first. This definition actually rejects the prominence of ICT's role, as cities are smart due to intelligent people and intelligent deliberation within it. And smart cities in this human dimension have a relatively high share of highly educated people, knowledge-intensive jobs, output-oriented planning systems, creative activities, and sustainability-oriented initiatives. I would, though, avoid this dichotomy. I would argue a classification of smart cities that tries to argue pro-ICT versus pro-human can thankfully be a false dichotomy. Why? Because I think intelligent humans can be encouraged to participate through a wider virtual community of ICT networks. So it's not necessarily a zero-sum game, per se, between one or the other to make smart regions. The fourth, the critical dimension of smart cities. It sees them as dehumanized spaces, which we've seen before as one potential dystopian scenario that has come up in images before today, or as a dystopian vision of development only towards strong, modern centralization without participation, having a requirement of unnecessary gadgetry and the tendency to have unconventional conduct of conventional matters. Like, why do you need the technology if you just want to chat with each other? I think that came up in Dr. Gawer's, like, you prefer to chat with each other, not go through a platform to do it. The author pool is disdainful, saying the term smart city is just a buzz phrase, the attractiveness of which has been overshadowed by the actual benefits of the concept. That promotes huge technology and engineering concerns that see a way to enclose another sector of social life, our urban government, in requirements to go through a major technological company's dependency forever. I mean, once you give them the big data, it's very hard to remove that kind of relationship, isn't it? Anyway, the critical dimension typically rejects the smart city concept, though I would suggest we can merge a lot of these things. I'm more optimistic than I look, right? Though I would suggest we can embrace pro-ICT, pro-human, and a critical dimension if we are very clear why we want to use ICT. For not just for the big data itself, but for encouraging human deliberation. So something we've always had a hard time doing at large scales. And now I think we can encourage deliberation at much larger scales than before because of these mobile ICT networks. With novel ICT capacities of virtual deliberation available, societies have saturated mobile ICT networks. The real virtual deliberation about urban and regional sustainability of a city and the function of its major infrastructures can work better if actual group deliberative intelligence is virtually facilitated. Smart regions, back to my point, original scarce ID concept may be outmoded. What is less commented upon in this whole literature is the media itself. The media context when this development idea of the smart city was created. The concept of smart city was conceived in the late 1990s, first in terms of smart growth movement or smart development. As Hojer and Wangel write, to a great extent, smart city is today still a conceptual concept advanced by the business sector because of that. This was when ICT was relatively expensive and peer-to-peer potentials of the network value of such services among the public were low. Thus, in the media's context, the higher transaction costs and central node solutions, including business-led ICT purveyors of solutions to sustainability, kept making sense. Thus, mental models of centralized solutions of smart cities were used as a planning rubric for sustainability because that was the only expected major area, the urban area, to be served by ICT networks. But now, as I showed you that global map, there are no places below 50% mobile saturation anymore. Why are we limiting ourselves to thinking about sustainable cities? We have a network proliferation, potentially, of the entire world. And what are the proper rubrics to analyze regional materials stability and sustainability? Anyway, however, with the rise of smartphone-saturated society, of mobile ICT, and wider rural coverage as well, this presumption of an important central or small geographic node at the heart of smart city has now ceased to be the case. Thus, having only tiny urban node-based definitions of smart city and those three senses of smart, which is typically smart ICT, smart infrastructural design, and ecologically smart, is somehow outmoded now. We have the luxury to think on the level of smart regions, to be more holistic in our ecological designs instead of limited to urban-based ICT arrangements. This is because, as said earlier, of a growing parity across wider landscapes of rural and urban areas alike after 20 years of growing mobile ICT coverage, and because of wider environmental concern. In short, mobile ICT networks are rewiring social life rapidly and changing the background social context of our past formal institutions linked to different media regimes. This network society is rewiring all social life as we start to live in smart regions, half real and half virtual, which I think are in 4 areas. We really are real and virtual state politics and journalism, knowledge access, consumption, and finance. We're blurring ourselves as half real and half virtual, and we're living there right now. But that can be good. So beyond my suggestions of scoring smart city regional development as 1 through 7 based on how many of the 7 infrastructures they have, you might also score how intelligent are our social infrastructures for ongoing group deliberation on those issues of states and journalism, science per se, or culture, interactions, materials, or finance. I said that. Anyway, thus from these points it is argued that past more centralized solutions for smart cities now innately move towards smart regions as the developmental model because that is how we actually culturally live now, half in real networks and half in virtual networks that can be scaled wider without problems. Plus, it is argued that the model of smart regions avoids the developed world bias that the concept of smart city entailed if smart development can only occur in already industrialized, developed urban countries. Third of 4 points, 2 scenarios for the future. Small, centralized smart cities, I would argue, cannot give us the wider sustainable material handling we really desperately need. So let us discuss 2 scenarios about the future, one negative and one positive. For the first negative scenario, let us picture one future for the year 2050, which is not too far away. This is a vision of a handful of tiny, rich, urban, and green living populations, but enjoying their late 20th century ideas of a smart city in the year 2050. But then surrounded by 21st century inequalities of massive rural slums, of gray material degradation and misery without services. Robert Neuwirth, author of Shadow Cities, A Billion Squatters, A New Urban World, writes that these shadow cities of the future are here now. Over 1 billion people by 2004 already lived in unauthorized urban slums, where governmental action toward them is basically the attempt to knock down their homes and their infrastructures and to deny them official citizenship status or urban services, or to ignore them until they wish to seize their homes that lack secure tenure on land. Some of these billions jumped and some were pushed. Some voluntarily moved to the growing city, seeing it as a future. Others are pushed from economic shakeout, from globalized development, particularly in rural peasant arrangements. Moving on, I think we can do better by extending a hand to them in smart regions, an idea or technical capacity that failed to exist in 2004 as Neuwirth was writing. This is completely different by 2019, even for sub-Saharan Africa, and mobile ICT network coverage will continue to grow into the less developed areas of the world. Neuwirth writes, there may be a doubling of the 1 billion slum dwellers from 2004 to 2 billion by 2030. And by 2050, that may be 3 billion people. This is actually World Bank estimates, not him per se. Nonetheless, how could the smart city model reach these people? Such planners and politicians may refuse to do so and may pretend these billions fail to exist. I think the smart regions model based on real virtual mobile ICT-based platforms for a smart city is the best hope for integrating them in real virtual communities of deliberation, aided by mobile ICT in everyone's hands. However, even with awareness of real virtual smart regions developing worldwide via saturated mobile ICT networks is in its infancy, we need such awareness soon, because we will, whether we like it or not, have these challenges of agglomeration of urban services and wastes by 2050. The other scenario, the positive future for the year 2050, the solution would be to add these community applications accessible via mobile phones to normal infrastructural planning. I was very pleased that Sungkyunkwan already had a great deal of these already, per se, with one platform for each of the 7 infrastructures. This can help us live in smart regions now that can handle service information from them. This will include on a real virtual platform these billions of people around major cities worldwide easily as they grow over the next several decades. In the second scenario, the late 20th century smart city becomes remembered as the seed of the mid-20th century smart region. In the previous scenario, the smart city may be remembered only as a vain upper-class green city destroyed by riots from the outside for those people denied such a life or simply outmoded by its own limitations within 30 years. Even if such a tiny smart city continues among such billions in slum conditions, it can only be remembered as the product of a very feudal and unequal world of walled, rich green cities ever on guard against billions of people in lower-class, serviceless poverty and degraded environments in the non-transformed cities outside the green walls. Given the latter scenario about smart regions is better, I recommend planners fall in love with a combination of the humanistic city and the transforming city model. I recommend they try to fall out of love with dreams of building smart, sustainable cities from scratch. The world can't handle that, I think. What we really do is find ways of transforming cities more ecologically now, all over the world. Despite this, smart cities from scratch is still the plan supported by current governments and major industrial powers in Korea, in China, and in India, which wants to build over 100 of them. To continue dreaming only of a smart city while staring at larger regional democratic and environmental problems is folly. Thus, we move slowly into the growing political, economic, and cultural destabilizations of the shadow city. Will the shadow city overshadow the smart city? Or will the smart city show us the way to reform the shadow city into the smart region? Regardless, tiny smart city developments would only be a panacea that fails to fit the size of the problem. The last section, I conclude with examples of this kind of online, real, virtual community development towards smart regions now, as well as my own ideas of a civil deliberative platform for smart regions called Commodity Ecology. And smart regions can be made intelligent by utilizing big data or deliberation from a virtual communities platform for generating data for the smart region. Such an online platform for deliberation and sharing take many forms. Many of them go under what's been mentioned, I think, by Mr. Petra, the shared economy, mobile applications widely used worldwide in the past 15 years. The shared economy is a greener model of temporary material sharing of access to equipment or services, and not the model of one person buys a copy of everything that's quickly thrown away. So I think it's a much more sustainable way to encourage access to items instead of individual ownership models. It is designed to grow access to services while minimizing ecological cost and material costs. And if we do have billions and billions of people that will all want their own mopeds, it's much better to have in place a sharing economy which tries to remove that desire, right? While people concentrate on the shared economy for its individual conveniences, I've been thinking how big data from the shared economy can make smart regions. For an example from China, an optimistic example, the shared economy mobile application Mobike now shares anonymized data of bikes with the city planners of China. This is how the city government gets detailed data about the problems of their transportation network's last mile problem, where people have the most problems in getting to their final destination after using various kinds of infrastructures of public transit. This big data from such shared economy virtual platforms, suitably anonymized, make the best use of mobile ICT networks and wider smart region development for improving public infrastructures by noting changes daily and weekly of the dynamics of what people want. Other kinds of aggregate bottom-up purchases in the big data context can be sampled to better adjust ongoing urban services. For instance, there's already payments for a lot of urban services. You could look at services of food and drinks and determine exactly what's the best place to have places for restaurants, for delivery services. You could look at transportation payments online through the mobile phone and how much people are paying. You could look at power energy, automated billing, or waste automated billing as well. And great financial data that may be used anonymously to understand expensive zones of power or water use. Anyway, it's important to avoid stereotyping that the big data should only come from consumers. Producers themselves are a major portion of our unsustainable world of waste. For an example from France, the country already has made it illegal for stores to throw away new unused and unsold clothing from the previous season of styles that now has to go on sale to others in poverty at special locations. And that is a kind of big data as well. I envision businesses platforms that scan and track how well or poorly businesses are in terms of their unsold lots and things like that. Now, my own 4-university smart region of the Incheon Global Campus in Songdo, I recently developed its own service app for all professors. It timestamps problems about all infrastructures, and it's transparent, and you can see that the extent that your complaint is being handled. Why not do that for a huge region or for a huge city? Various complaints can be centrally and transparently forwarded to the city or regional authority through a mobile phone app with tabs in the app for the 7 main infrastructural problems. Already, sub-Saharan countries like Kenya, 50 million people in Kenya, same size as Korea, right? Kenya already has a national app system for reporting police problems. Kenya already has an election problem. I mean, you're behind. Kenya's ahead. India's ahead. India has 1.3 billion people. They've got national apps for registering complaints about the civil service. Why call somebody? Why write a letter? These apps exist, and really, this is called reverse innovation. Reverse innovation is where undeveloped or less developed countries really have good ideas for cheaply doing services that green concerned countries like industrial zones really should look at. It's called reverse innovation. But anyway, examples, we now have wide area mobile apps for smart regional transport telling us how to get a taxi and all these things. But nonetheless, we should have other online platforms for real virtual community and civil deliberation about all other infrastructures, about water infrastructural problems, about energy reliability, about waste handling, about reporting government election malfeasance, about communications reliability, and more. We can make the citizens the eyes and the ears of the infrastructures they use. Anyway, instead of about 7 major urban infrastructural services, my idea of commodity ecology as a smart regional mobile application helps us think more systematically about 130 material choices holistically and ramifications of each material choice and waste stream per choice. One of my ideas for this revolution in smart regional deliberations is a model, rubric, and checklist for sustainability of these 130 material categories on a virtual platform for deliberation in over 860 distinct ecoregions simultaneously. There's already a prototype, it's online right now. The United Nations Academic Impact Office called Commodity Ecology a top global initiative for actually achieving the Sustainable Development Goal number 12, responsible consumption and production. What I suggest is we add 3 rubrics to planning. And one, how do we access disaggregated geography? I mean, a city government isn't always going to be the best optimal way. I'm suggesting watersheds or ecoregions, and those do not overlap per se, and we can learn from each other on that issue. How do we also have a better perspective about disaggregated materials? We need more material clarity, not just about 7 infrastructures of the society of the urban site, but what are the 130 different materials that we socially use? And these 3 questions can be asked to get sustainability from that. And when you organize a global social media about this, organize in 860 plus ecoregions, you have 130 categories in each, you develop this long-term deliberation about what is materially good and materially bad, and about waste handling for a particular region. Awareness of cost effectiveness of reaching billions of people with mobile phone technology. That's how we reach disaggregated people. So 3, disaggregation. We need a better idea of disaggregated geography, disaggregated materials, and how to reach everybody individually. And the prototype is right there at comwheel.azurewebsites.net. Very close to the end, we required debate and deliberation from all involved about choosing all kinds of materials and waste streams. Commodity ecology can provide such a platform and rubric of analysis that assures all categories of commodity use are being discussed in terms of their ecological design. This is a picture of the disaggregated materials. If you're curious, I will share my email, and I will send you a copy of this. But you can also go to commodityecology.blogspot.com for the list of 130. Here's how you access, it's kind of blurred, but that's a close-up of the wheel with different versions. Here's how you access disaggregated materials. Here's disaggregated geographies. And here's how you access disaggregated people with mobile phones. Now I'll close right there. Thank you very much.
네, 휘태거 박사님의 강의 정말 너무 잘 들었습니다.